Mira Business FM, the sound of success.
It's Mira Business FM. It's the morning drive with me, Tim Elliott. And the global automotive industry now going through its, I think fair to say, its biggest transformation in decades, from EVs, connected cars, to smarter logistics, new mobility services. So the way we move, the way we do business is changing fast. It's no different here in the UAE. So it's, if we put it really simply, it's a transformation that means opportunities, it means challenges, and that's for investors, for automakers, startups on the ground. That's where we're going next. Donnelly is the Director of Strategic Partnerships at AutoTech Ventures, which is a mobility investment firm, a global firm, works with automakers and startups across North America, Europe, Asia, and now, Brian, the Middle East. You're very welcome. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you here. Look, we're in a region we're seeing increasingly strong government backing. We have ambitious electric vehicle targets, a growing startup ecosystem. It really seems to me that we're in a place that's well positioned to become a hub for mobility innovation. We've got the drive, the ambition, there's the funding, there's the government backing, and it seems as though there's the political will, and it's a pretty good mix, isn't it?
It is. That's why we're so excited to be here. We've been growing our relationships and presence here in the region for the last couple of years. Recently started to hire here in the region as well too, and so we're going to be a permanent fixture here because for all the reasons that you mentioned, we're really excited about the transitions that we're seeing, the opportunities that are going to continue to present themselves, and we want to play a small role in bringing, whether it's ecosystem and partnerships from global to here in the UAE or to GCC more broadly, or being able to invest in great entrepreneurs that are here that are going to build the next great companies.
Okay, can we talk very specifically about the UAE? The National Electric Vehicles Policy aims to make this country a global EV market, increasing EV share to 50% by, I think it's 2050. From an investor's perspective, is that a realistic target, do you think?
Directionally, yes. I would say what it looks like over the next 20 or 25 years won't be steady and incremental. I think what we will see is fits and starts like we have in all of the other regions around the world that have similar aggressive targets in terms of this transition. One of the, I would say, benefits that you have here over maybe home country in the US is a very strong leadership that is committed long-term to this vision. The infrastructure will be built over time in order to make that transition possible. You also have the influx of things like Chinese OEMs that have a proliferation of electric vehicles at lower cost that will allow for consumers to get into and experience those electric vehicles maybe at a lower cost than they were at Europe or in the US.
Can I just put something to you from the COO? I mentioned this briefly to you off air. I've just found the quote here. It's the Chief Operating Officer of ADNOC Distribution, which is the largest fuel and, I suppose, convenience retailer combination. It's a guy called Klaus Mantel. Said recently that ADNOC's open to providing services for driverless vehicles. He says they're prepared for driverless vehicles. You can see that. They've got obviously the network, the infrastructure is ongoing, the personnel are there. Here's something else as well. He told the national newspaper recently he could well imagine that in future we could serve autonomous cars. It's not a part of what we do today particularly, but petrol stations have evolved into mobility stations. It's what we're seeing. They're definitely good places for where that could happen. So there's another example of the will and infrastructure building up, of course. So what's happening here? The UAE is rapidly embracing EVs, strong government support, charging infrastructure. DEWA's Green Charger initiative is growing fast. Consumer interest is there. Sales growth is significant. So the UAE, to me, is well on the way to a regional leadership position. But what's missing? What could widen or popularize the sector further in your
EV specifically or on the autonomous side?
I think EV specifically to start with.
Yeah. Infrastructure will be number one, right? And it needs to have the consumer adoption that it makes it easier from day to day, right? Consumers are going to make a rational choice at the end of the day when it comes to the vehicles that they're driving. It's very easy to pull up to the petrol station, 30 seconds later, you've got a full tank of gas and you're on your way. Will those mobility hubs truly be able to integrate consumer experiences that somebody is willing to sit around for maybe 30 or 45 minutes in order to take their vehicle from empty to full, quote unquote, right, in terms of the electric infrastructure that needs to be built in order to do that? I think as the automakers continue to invest in their own capabilities, fast charging becomes more ubiquitous across the country here. I think you'll have enough competition that will drive prices in the right direction that makes for consumers. The driving experience of an electric vehicle is incredible, right? And so people will enjoy driving the vehicle itself. Whether they will enjoy owning the vehicle is yet to be seen. And that also comes with the service of electric vehicles, which is vastly different from internal combustion engine vehicles, right? And so even if you think about the infrastructure of repair, of inspection, of battery health and maintenance, all of those are yet to be proven out, yet to be built out. And I think as folks, whether it's entrepreneurs or the large and incumbent players that are here today, are able to focus on that, I think that'll also help that consumer adoption, help that consumer experience. Because what you don't want is to people buying an electric vehicle, having a terrible experience, going back to internal combustion engine, never to see an electric vehicle again.
Yeah, for sure. What about autonomous vehicles then?
Longer road for sure, right?
Yeah.
Like we've been, so AutoTech has been around for over 10 years at this point. And when we started the firm, we were talking about autonomous vehicles, right? Think about 2015, 2016. There was an explosion of LiDAR companies. Everybody was going to solve. I used to work for JP Morgan. I was at the bank, and everybody was calling, hey, 2025, 2026, nobody's going to have personally owned vehicles any longer. It's all going to be autonomous. It's going to be, you can sleep, you can go, you can do whatever you want in the vehicles itself. Here we are today. Obviously, that's not the case, right? And so from an autonomous perspective, I think it will still be a very slow evolution. We're seeing, at least in the US, the rise of car sharing or ride sharing, like the Waymos of the world, are really starting to expand, and the experience is phenomenal. That will come here as well too, but it will be through fleets. I think personal ownership, we are still 10, 15, 20 years away, in which there is a significant aspect of the car park that's owned by people like you and I that are fully autonomous.
It's interesting, this. About 10, 12 years ago, a friend of mine, a business journalist friend of mine, said to me, we're talking about our kids, and my son is now 22, learned to drive when he was 17, 18 here. So at this point, he was 10 years old.
Yeah.
And this friend of mine said to me, you know, it's very unlikely that he'll even get a driving license.
That's right.
You know, because would he need one? And that was kind of the prevailing wisdom at the time. And I thought to myself, no, I'm not so sure about that, because I still like driving a car. I'm driving for years, but I still enjoy it. And it's something that you kind of pass on, isn't it? It's a rites of passage thing. It hasn't come to pass yet, that's for sure. I just wonder how far you think we are away from that point, even though 10, 12 years ago, that was supposed to be the point.
Yeah. So our investment lens is really about a 10-year horizon, right? So we're early stage investors, right? And so we're looking for companies that are just getting started today, that are hopefully going to grow into big businesses in 5 to 10 years from now. And so we like that 5 to 10 year, let's say, time horizon. We personally are not investing in, let's say, personal autonomy vehicles on highway applications of autonomous technologies. Okay. Where we think there's big opportunities is off-highway. So you think about mining and construction, think about agriculture. So a lot of money has gone into the sensor suites in terms of the business model, in terms of the technology evolution. Where is it that these business models can be durable? We think it's much more in private land use, in things like agriculture, things like construction, things like mining, things like warehouse automation.
Just one more thing I wanted to put to you about, and I'm going backwards here, in order to go forwards, to be fair. Just something that the COO of ADNOC said, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this, because it does mark a shift, I think. If there is a regulatory environment, he said, and this is him talking to the national newspaper, that is supportive, it's very much part of our strategy. And I thought this was the really interesting quote. We're a mobility company.
Yeah.
And in some ways, we're energy agnostic, which is highly counterintuitive to me, things say, although obviously it's not.
That's right.
If the market goes electric, we'll go there.
Right.
This is the chief operating officer of ADNOC, the national oil company of the United Arab Emirates.
Yeah. So I would say you have similar quotes from the likes of Shell, the likes of Exxon, the likes of these other global. So
Yeah.
they are thinking about what their retail footprint looks like. You mentioned what the charging stations of the future are.
Yeah.
But it is driven by things like regulatory framework, and the more consistent and long-term view that governments can take, it's a lot easier for the business community to be able to make those large investments to do that transition, because it doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen if you change your mind, 3-4 years into what is a 10 or 15-year project, right? And so I think that's a huge benefit to have here, likely while your transition will be hopefully a little less painful than what we've had here in the U.S. But I do think that it will take public-private partnership, like the one that you're talking about, in order for it to be a durable transition that'll last.
A bit of predictability in unpredictable times,
Yeah.
I suppose. You know what always interests me about this is it seems, I said this to you before, but it's a remarkable change, I think. It seems like a year, 2 years ago, a Chinese EV was really the exception. You were like, "Ooh, what's that?" And it really now it's nothing now,
Yeah.
is it? It's a huge shift. And I get that it's we like our shiny new gadgets here. I get that they're cheaper, but they really are everywhere. You can really see the market moving forward.
Yeah. The value proposition here is undeniable, right?
It is,
You've
yeah.
got an incredible assortment of choices, right? I think there's probably 30 plus Chinese OEMs that are selling vehicles across the GCC, but I think many of them are here in UAE. You've got a price point, right, that brings luxury into a much more affordable category. We've seen just affordability for mobility broadly become a huge barrier to owning a vehicle, to getting places. And so if you can get a really well-made, luxurious feeling vehicle at a price of what used to be a entry-level Toyota, you're going to have a lot of consumers that are willing to adopt that. The question is, how long-lasting will that adoption be? And so one of the things that we've heard in our experience here is these Chinese OEMs, they operate different from, let's say, the quote-unquote legacy OEMs, whether those are European, Japanese, Korean, US. And one of the elements is, how is it that they handle things like parts? How is it that they handle the elements of the aftermarket, going back to what is that consumer's experience like with that brand?
Yeah.
And they're not going to just say, oh, this is a Chinese OEM, it's BYD, or it's Geely, or it's Great Wall, whatever OEM that they've decided to go with. And then what is the support and infrastructure associated with that experience itself, too? And so I think you guys are still in early innings in terms of your adoption of Chinese OEMs. They've got a long way to go in order to build a long-lasting, let's say, brand adoption and loyalty that the likes of a Toyota or a Nissan have spent decades and decades putting together.
You can see the early steps there, but I do wonder, and I don't mean to be flippant, and I don't mean to bring this down to too much of a base level.
Yeah.
But are we looking at a time where we treat our cars the way we treat our phones? We upgrade and trade them in every 2-3 years for the next shiny model? I don't know.
So the importers, exporters, the recycling companies, they would love that, right?
bet they
For
would.
that to be, obviously, if you think about, the alignment to some of the green movement or the aspects of making the industry a lot more efficient, that's probably not the best case to go. But yeah, you're right. If you have a $10,000 or $15,000 vehicle, are you willing to swap it out every 3 or 4 years, and you don't really care what the resale value is of that? Is that for everybody? Probably not. Is that for the mass market? Probably not. And so I do think that ultimately people need to feel safe and secure in those vehicles, right? Like, I think if your cell phone gets a little bit warm, you just pull it away from your ear for a little while and put it back on the charger. It's a little bit of a higher standard when you're, moving the people that you care about the most through traffic here in Dubai.
That's a good point. What is it that makes the UAE, and I guess the wider GCC, now that you're firmly kind of here, if you like, what makes them attractive markets for mobility and automotive startups, do you think?
Yeah. We've seen a ton of emerging, let's say, disruptions happening, all kind of compounding together at once. And so we've touched on the Chinese. Obviously, there's a huge aspect that trickles through the entire ecosystem there. The other piece is rising labor rates. And so I think this part of the world has enjoyed very low labor costs for decades.
Yeah.
And it seems as if there's a lot of initiatives, whether it's here in the UAE, certainly in Saudi as well too, in terms of rising labor costs. What we typically see when you have rising labor costs is an increased need for digitization. And that doesn't mean necessarily to avoid hiring labor, but it's also to make that labor much more productive. And so where we see Europe, where we see North America in terms of adoption of digitization, whether it's in a dealership, whether it's in your supply chain and logistics provider, whether it's at your local gas station or retail, very, very low levels of digitization as compared to some of these markets that have had very high labor costs for quite some time. And so we see big motivations for digitization. We see big motivations from the dealership and distributive organizations to understand how to compete in this new world of legacy OEMs with Chinese OEMs. We see big opportunities in the aftermarket. Like we said, used car pricing is something that has a big opportunity, not only on the business model innovation, but on the tech side as well too, which will allow for, again, more efficiency in the ownership, hopefully lower cost of ownership, but also increasing that customer experience as well too.
What are the challenges that early stage mobility companies in this region face, Brian, when it comes to scaling?
Yeah.
Do you think?
I don't know if it's distinct to this region specifically. I mean, scaling a startup is hard anywhere, right? And so I think one of the elements, at least from the investor community, that is a lot more front and center is the trade-off between scale and product and profitability, right? And so again, not to harp on 10 years ago, but as we were in the zero interest rate environment, there was a lot more emphasis on hyperscale, right? Get as much market share, doesn't matter what it costs. People weren't necessarily thinking about the burn rate of these startups themselves in terms of the cash that they were spending in order to get to that market share. They saw a problem, they attacked the problem, and it was how quickly could they spread that solution throughout the various markets, right? It's a little bit different today. I think startups are being asked not only to scale, but also to do so profitably, which is, at times at odds with each other, right? And so it's a daunting task for many. But as we think about it at the early stage, as what our counterparts that are investing at later growth stages, and certainly if you think about public market investors as well too, clear path to profitability is important. And so being able to manage that simply just from a business model perspective is going to always be, let's say, a little bit of a governor as it relates to some of the scalability.
Okay, well, with that in mind, how are you viewing startups in this region compared to those in mature markets, the North Americas, Europe, for example?
Yeah. Well, there's an unbelievable entrepreneurial spirit here, right? A lot of the businesses were created anywhere from 10 to 60 years ago, right? And so the businesses themselves are very used to working with other partners. And so that lends itself to great scalability for a startup that wants to come in and say, work with the incumbents that are in the space today, because they don't have, hey, we're going to build all of our solutions internally. That's not necessarily the mindset, at least from what we have seen.
Let's look at the broader picture. When you look at the global automotive industry today, still in EV terms, a young industry, but a very mature industry in all other ways. What's the biggest shift you're seeing compared to 5 years ago or 10 years ago? Well, let's go back as far as 15 years so that we can really encompass the EV space, if you like.
Yeah. There's a lot of talk around artificial intelligence, as I'm sure you could imagine.
I was waiting for you to say that word. We did
20
it.
minutes in, artificial intelligence. So the applications from business and enterprise level, I would say, are still in the nascent stage, right? We've got a long way to go to make these things a productive use of, to reach the full potential of what that technology is, right? But it can be applied across all aspects of transportation. So again, if you think about the buying and the selling of a vehicle itself inside of a dealership, we're seeing a proliferation of different AI applications that can help workflows, that can help customer communications, that can help things like underwriting and pricing much more efficiently than, say, a human could. We're also seeing it on the manufacturing side. And so we have seen, obviously, a big shift. We were talking a little bit about global politics before the mics came on, in terms of manufacturing bases being set up closer to where the consumers are, right? We spent decades and decades on globalizing the supply chain.
Yep.
And now there's a big focus on what are the critical elements that each country wants to, quote unquote, own, right? In terms of having security or safety around certain supply chain chokeholds. And so the only way for you to be able to compete from a manufacturing standpoint today is automation, right? You won't be able to compete in the US with Taiwan, for instance, who have been building semiconductors as their main economic export for the last 4 or 5 decades, right?
Yeah.
And so we're also seeing that same artificial intelligence being applied on the manufacturing side. We're seeing it being applied on the supply chain visibility side. We're seeing it applied on the logistics aspect of it as well, too, right? You think about how batteries, the deep tech that goes into the chemistries that are making these energy transitions a lot more efficient and a lot more productive. There's a lot of artificial intelligence that are being applied to that as well, too. And so I would say that the speed in which this innovation is happening is at a different pace than we've ever seen before. The ability for a startup to scale with very limited resources is also something, being very capital efficient on the way in which they use those. And so we think ultimately that is going to be a huge boon for not only the transportation ecosystem, but hopefully for the technology ecosystem broadly.
What about the traditional automakers, but their response to mobility startups? You know, this rise in mobility startups. Are partnerships the norm? Is there trepidation there?
Each is different, right? You know, everybody is.
I love the wry
Yeah,
smile.
yeah, each is different. So I think that the global OEMs are waking up and they've got very challenging business forecasts ahead of them. It is a tough place for them. I used to work at General Motors, and so I know that, you know, when we were competing and selling vehicles in China, it was a very profitable aspect of the business. Today, if I'm reading the reports correctly, GM is losing a lot of money in China. And so the global ecosystem looks a lot different if you're an OEM. And so they're getting threats probably more so than any point in the entire history of their existence. And so they can make the decision that we are going to be expert in certain elements of this infrastructure. But I think many of them are also waking up to say, we need global partnerships. We need great innovative tech startups to be able to help us build out these solutions. And we have great partnerships with a lot of the OEMs in terms of whether it's their own investment arms. A lot of them have these corporate venture arms that are out there trying to scout what the next great startups are, but also making investments themselves so they can enjoy some of the upside of the things that they're implementing into their supply chain and operations themselves. And so I do think that OEMs, in order for them to compete in this new landscape, have got to become much more efficient, much more innovative. And one of the ways, not the only way, one of the ways to do that is to work with great startups.
Okay. I was going to ask you about cross-border partnerships. I mean, partnerships are so key here, but the role that they help in with regional startups to help them grow, to help them compete globally. So there is this kind of what's the term? I don't know, the yin, the yang. You know, that's clearly one of the keys here, isn't it, to making this work?
And I would say one of the things that we haven't quite proven out, at least from our experience, is taking Western startups, whether they're from Europe, whether they're from the US, and being able to apply those technologies here. Each of the countries in the GCC are very different, right, in terms of their localization that is required. Right. You also take a look at, again, if you think about finite resources at a startup, you've got 330 million people in the US, you've got 120 million people in Japan. You've got really large markets that are typically number 1, number 2, number 3 on, let's say, their global expansion. The question is, how do we get them excited about the framework that's here in a country of 10 million people? or in Saudi with 30 million people. And so the opportunities exist. I think what is more likely is for greater participation and entrepreneurship here locally, that is building here locally, which again is why we're spending so much time here, versus saying, oh, well, this worked really well in London, so let's just import it over here and apply it to, let's say, the local environment.
It's increasingly not the case. It doesn't work like that anymore, does it? We're seeing proprietary technology from the UAE. We're seeing so much development here in the UAE. It really is changing. Let me ask you a slightly broader question. In your experience, from what you see, from what you've seen, the mobility solutions or the tech, what's gaining the most traction with investors at the moment?
AI.
You did it
Yeah,
again.
I know.
Two on the bingo
It's
card.
it is. If you were to strip out all of the AI investment, I've seen reports as much as about 80% of venture dollars is going into AI applications, right? And so it is very challenging, I will say, for your traditional SaaS business to break through what is the laser focus on where artificial intelligence can take us. And so if I were to recommend to people who are just trying to start a company today, you've got to have at least an AI story. Maybe you don't have to, but it's going to help tremendously. Because I do think that so many people have spent time in their personal lives playing around with generalized artificial intelligence, be it ChatGPT or Gemini. Where we are lacking is productivity in terms of enterprise software as it relates to the application of artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
We take a view of needing to be very vertically integrated and application specific. We're not investing in general AI. We need AI for logistics. We're looking for AI for manufacturing, AI for dealerships, AI for risk and insurance and underwriting and fintech. And so those are where so much money is being poured into today. Most of it won't work. That's just the general nature of how startups are. However, I would say that that's where a lot of the focus and a lot of the money is being spent today.
You need at least to be able to drop AI into conversation, which you've done brilliantly, by the way. And
I promise it'll be the last time.
I respect that.
Yeah.
If I ask you that same question in a couple of years' time, will the answer be
I hope it's different.
quantum?
I hope, I hope it's different, or the
Highly
next
likely.
evolution of it.
Yeah.
It is all encompassing right now, I would say.
Yeah.
I don't expect it to be that way, because, another question that we get a lot is, are we in a bubble? Is this just another hype cycle? And the answer is probably yes. But there are also productive uses of bubbles and hype cycles as well too, right? It's not all destruction. There will be a lot of capital destruction. And so investors need to be very cautious about entry and exit pricing. But just like we saw in .com, right? A lot of money got burnt on a lot of very suboptimal business models, but it still created the likes of Google, right? And it's still 25 years from now, one of the most important elements to the global economy is our ability to be connected, right? And so AI, you can think about it in a similar way. There's going to be a lot of missteps. There's going to be a lot of capital. There's going to be a lot of productivity. And there's going to be a lot of optimism and good that comes from it. And so I think right now we're not through it yet, right? And so hopefully we'll have the opportunity to chat in a few years, and hopefully we will be, quote unquote, through it. The winners and the losers will start to shake themselves out, but I think the winners will have such a dramatic impact on the way that we do business that it'll be productive overall.
Okay. My mother always used the phrase, it'll come out in the wash.
It'll come out in the wash.
Things kind of iron themselves out. And I guess that's as good a way of phrasing it as any.
Markets are efficient.
They are. That's certainly the truth. In terms of automotive startups, automotive services companies picking up steam here in the region, I'm thinking of an example from a few years ago. It's about 4 years ago, maybe. Seas, which was going to be a Shopify kind of idea for the automotive industry. But in terms of those startups and service companies, what are you seeing?
Yeah, Seas is a great example. We know that team quite well. I'm having lunch with the founder tomorrow, so shout out Tarek. I'll see you in a few hours. And so that's a great example of locally built startup. Was acquired by a European company,
Yeah,
right, Pinewood.
yeah.
And they've got big plans to leverage that technology that was built here in what will be a global expansion.
Mm.
And so I think that those are the types of opportunities that we would love to see more. And one of the reasons that we want to spend our time here is to find those next great entrepreneurs to help them also along their journey as they're starting and thinking about what those next elements could be. And so if you think about the way that the technologies that exist inside of a dealership today, there's a dealer management system, a DMS. Those systems are legacy technology that were built by companies like Microsoft that weren't necessarily thinking about the dealership in particular. There's accounting softwares that don't talk to the CRM, that don't talk to these DMS providers. And so there is such a disparate group of data sources that exist inside of a dealership that need to be brought together, not only for efficiency, but for insights as well too, right? And so we see that as a big opportunity that are there. We talked a little bit about supply chain forecasting, visibility, all aspects is going to be increasingly important. And so we see big opportunities that are built there. We would love to see more manufacturing happening here in the region as well too, right? We understand that there's a lot of initiatives from a government perspective, again, public-private partnership in order to bring that here. That'll require great automation. That'll require, new different talent and experiences that can be brought in as well too.
We're a little bit over time, but they can shout at me later. That's fine. Final question for you, and it's kind of a broad question, but I'm also going to ask you to zero in a little bit. The logic will become clear. 5 years away.
Yep.
What part of the mobility ecosystem are you expecting to grow fastest in the UAE and perhaps the wider GCC as well?
I think that there's a lot of opportunity in the consumer financing around vehicles themselves. And so there is very high penetration of consumer financing. Not a lot of vehicles are being bought in cash. A lot of them are being bought typically through loans. I think there's opportunities to make that a lot more efficient in terms of the process, working with the local financial institutions. Residual value forecasting, again, is the thing that we do not know about these Chinese OEMs is what's the resale value 5 years from now. We know there's going to be a lot of them, right? We know people are going to be returning them and buying into new cars. There's going to be a lot. And so what is the impact in 5 years from now on the batteries that were in those vehicles, on the service that's required for those vehicles to get back onto the road to increase the useful life for their next driver as well too. And so we think financial services, we think everything kind of residual value, used vehicle pricing, aftermarket specifically, are all things as you see big increases in influx over the last couple years in certain aspects. And then same thing with electric vehicles as well too. That penetration will continue to rise, but also the services that are wrapped around those electric vehicles need to rise in conjunction. And we think that those are going to be cool opportunities for us to hopefully invest in.
Ryan Donnelly is the Director of Strategic Partnerships at AutoTech Ventures. Appreciate you joining me this morning.
Thanks, Sam. Really enjoyed it.
It's good. Mira Business FM, this is The Morning Drive. Get in touch with the show. Let us know what you think across social media. Like, subscribe. We always appreciate that. And everything we do is available to listen to or watch, or both, again, on the website, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just search Mira Business FM.